Okay, so contrary to Russell's introduction, I'm not here to tell you why Django sucks. I'm also not here to tell you why Drupal is awesome, although it is. I'm here to take you sightseeing into two different cities in the world of the open web. I'm Donna Benjamin. I sit on the board of the Drupal Association. I used to chair the community working group of the Drupal community, and I'm on the board of Open Australia Foundation. And I recently joined Catalyst IT here in Melbourne. But this is not about me, so I don't want to go into any more detail on any of that. The only important thing is I'm Catacrab on the Twitters, and if you want to talk to me on the Twitters. I'd be here. I want to hear your comments, your disagreements. I want you to amplify stuff you like. I really want to continue this conversation. So, London and Paris. A Tale of Two Cities is a classic novel written by Charles Dickens. Who here has read it? Hands up. A few of you. Who here has perhaps seen a movie adaptation? Hardly anyone. I've got a confession to make. I've done neither. I just really like the title. A Tale of Two Cities compares London and Paris in revolutionary and post-revolutionary France. This is the terribly famous opening line of the book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. Dualities. This talk has nothing to do with this book. Are you relieved? Some of you are, yeah, good. Okay, so except for one key fact, and that is it as a point of comparison. Django and Drupal are both projects in the midst of a different kind of revolution. Every one of those darkly clustered houses encloses its own secret. Is it weird to think of Django and Drupal as cities? In a way, they are. They're cities in a world of open source software. They're made of people. When we enter a new city, we have the opportunity to make discoveries. Every house has its secret. But there are no secrets to the inhabitants of those houses. We know what's going on in our houses, but people outside have no idea. So I want to take you on a bit of a subterranean tour of the Drupal community. I want to show you a little bit about us, and I want you to draw your own comparisons with the Django community, because I can't. I've only just met you. I was only just invited to come hang out. So I leave it as an exercise for the audience to consider how you compare to what I'm going to show you about Drupal. So I first met Django about a decade ago. To this day, this is one of the most awesome conference talks I ever saw. And I think it may have even been a lightning talk. Are either of these people in the room, Alan Green and Ben Askins? No? So what they did was they were evaluating a framework for creating websites. And I think they may have been buddies, or they were in the same team or something, and one was like a Python developer and the other was a Ruby developer, and they wanted to kind of check it out. So they put together a spec for a product that they wanted to build, and they went ahead and they kind of built it. But in their lightning talk, they did it side by side within 5 minutes. And it was awesome. It was like neck and neck. Was it Django going to win or was Ruby going to win? And there were strengths and weaknesses, and it just brought the whole kind of debate to light. What's really awesome is they wrote a paper, and they actually kind of showed their, the research that they had done and where the points of comparison were, and where Django was better than Ruby, where Ruby was better than Django. It was really, really cool. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be video or slides or anything, so I've probably built up this great memory of this thing, which is probably completely false, but, it lives in my mind. So that's when I first Django. There you go. when I first met Django. It's kind of scary that that's a decade ago. So I have been aware of you guys. This one's less awesome. Those of you who know me know that I'm a massive Inkscape fan. It's a great open source project. It's just awesome. They made a decision a few years ago to rebuild their website using Django CMS. Awesome! Not so much. This has been a cause of confusion and frustration for me. I come as a professional content management kind of person, and I just went, how does this thing even work? To be fair, it was probably me, and the minute I kind of Googled around, I generally found my way through, but it was just really puzzling to me. I wanted them to use Drupal, but And this is another thing I know about the Django community. You have a really strong code of conduct. Even better than that, there's a guide on how to uphold the code of conduct. And you go one step further, publicly making available information on the number of incidents that have been reported and handled. This is outstanding. It really is. So thank you. And thank you for another reason. When I was on the Drupal community working group, we borrowed from Django's enforcement manual. I'm not so keen on the name, but we borrowed from that document when creating our own policy for handling conflict. And whilst we can never share code, because we're built in different languages, we speak different languages, PHP and Python, we can share process. We can share how we do community, or we can learn from each other in very real and practical ways. And I think this is an example of that. So I'm really grateful for the work this community has done in this space, and impressed. So kudos. Give yourselves a round of applause. Well done. So, okay, it's been said that Django is a framework with CMS-like tendencies by someone anonymous, and that Drupal is a CMS with framework-like tendencies. What does that mean? What does that really mean? Hold that thought, tell me later, tweet it at me. I'd really like to kind of unpack that a bit, and I'm not going to do it now. But what I think it means is that we actually have a huge amount in common. We're trying to solve the same kinds of problems, right? Yes? We're trying to build websites of one kind or another. We kind of, as Drupal as a CMS with framework-like tendencies, sort of gets into the web application space. And sometimes Django gets asked to do boring content management. Yeah? So we have a lot in common. We actually have some of the same end users. Like the people who visit a Drupal site or a Django site have no idea it's been built with Drupal or Django. The people who are putting content on those sites probably didn't get to choose whether it was going to be Drupal or Django. They're kind of victims of it, in a way, as I was with the Inkscape site. So we have a lot more in common than we might think. So here's a puzzle for you. What 6-letter word, beginning with D, is the name of a popular web development tool? Guesses? Is it 3 down or 6 across? It's both, right? It's a really silly thing to sort of highlight how much we have in common. But it's kind of, it's there. It's a trivial thing, but, tricky for crossword puzzle designers. Oh, points later for anyone who can guess what 1 across is. One of the other things we have in common is the Django Software Foundation and the Drupal Association are both US non-profits. They share the same legal structure. They're both 501c3s. And this means that they're educational. It also means that they are that they can receive donations which are tax deductible if you're a United States taxpayer. Not so much for us, but we'll leave that alone. But there are other non-profit structures in the US, and some of them are more like trade associations. But this one that we use, both Django and Drupal, is much more about a public good and providing a public benefit. And I think that's interesting commonality we have as well. This one's obvious, right? Was this a surprise to anybody? They're both open source. But this is where they're different licenses. I'm not going to get into the deep, dirty differences of BSD versus GPL, but it is a difference, and it has an impact on the culture and the ecosystem around the project. So, onto those differences. This is a great quote. Geert Hofstede is a Dutch sociologist. Culture is to a collective what personality is to the individual. So I sort of thought when I was preparing this talk that I would go and see what I could find out about Django's culture. And I found, I think it was in the Django book in chapter 1, this line: how Django's origins have shaped the culture of its open source community. Haha, I thought I found it. Didn't actually turn out to be that illuminating, but what did follow was this: we welcome you. We work with the Django web framework and we invite everyone to contribute to the core Django code, to the ecosystem of Django packages and the community. Come build the web with us. That's pretty cool. That's pretty open. That's pretty inviting. Do you stand by that? Do you find that's a good indication of the culture of your community? Are you all asleep? Give me some nods or shakes. Yes? Great, good on you. Being welcoming is not actually all that common in our open source world. So clearly Django is a great city for visitors to visit, for tourists to sightsee. Good on you. So I want to plant a seed in your thoughts. I want to ask you this question. How would you describe the Django community? Okay? I want you to think about this. Hold the thought, write it down, tweet it. Wake back up. I want you to really sort of think about it. Actually, stop thinking about it now. Let it marinate in the back of your minds and tell me later. I really kind of want to know, how would you describe the Django community? This is some pictures of the Drupal community out to play at events like this one. These are various Drupal events around the world at various points in time. That one down there is Drupal South in Melbourne a few years ago. Up in the top, that's Drupal Women. That's one of the big conferences in the US. The one in the middle is Sydney DrupalCon. We're big. There's a lot of us, and we are everywhere. Absolutely all over the planet, except in Antarctica. I know. Sorry? Woot! That is awesome! That is so awesome. Congratulations. I'm very pleased to hear that Django is in Antarctica. That is so cool. So this is a kind of global map. Every pin here represents a party that was had late last year to celebrate the release of Drupal 8. It was fantastic. I was very pleased to see that Hobart made it onto the list as the most southerly, to beat Reykjavik as the most northerly. So it's pretty cool. Of course, we celebrate with cake, but the Drupal fervour doesn't end there. We also, for some reason, have Drupal soup. This has always puzzled me. And Drupal bacon, which is a bit weird. What floats your boat? Some people are really committed. Drupal tattoos, and this is not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. Drupal is filled with people who are passionate about Drupal. And we say, come for the code and stay for the community. And it's really true. Some people mutter under their breath because you wouldn't stay for the code. I won't comment. But they do stay for the community. And sometimes that causes its own challenges. There's even Drupal babies, because, you know, community brings people together, right? So, community is really at the heart of this. We talk an awful lot about community when we talk about open source, an awful lot, right? But what is it? What do we actually mean by community? Again, another question. Ponder it. I'd really like to hear some thoughts about what we mean by community. I suggest that to have a better understanding, that we look back. Let's be honest here. Humans have been doing community for a lot longer than they've been doing the technologies that we take for granted. We've been gathering in groups and sharing knowledge and all of that kind of stuff for, you know, millennia as opposed to decades. There's much we can learn from old, ancient communities. This picture is of a stone house. So you're probably familiar with round houses in prehistoric UK. You're probably less familiar with the fact that this is here in Victoria. This stone house, the foundations of this stone house are at least 1700 years old. And it's part of a group of houses which represents the fact that there was a community that lived in them, and a whole ecosystem of eel traps nearby where industry, you know, there was an industry of trading the eels around the country. We can learn a lot from communities outside the tech world, but we don't often do that. Who here is familiar with the Koha information management system or library management system? Yeah? The leader of the Koha project is Chris Cormack, and he gave a really beautiful talk at LinuxConf AU this year about what he's learned from his Maori heritage and applied in his Koha community. It was really touching, and there were some fantastic lines in it and phrases, but they're in Maori and I can't pronounce them, so go watch the talk. Really worthwhile. I've been saying for a while that I think the open source should try to solve some of its community challenges by turning outwards. At DrupalCons, we've been running community summits for a while, and I've facilitated the last couple of them and been involved in the sort of iterations that existed before that. I also run the Community Leadership Summit at LinuxConf AU for the past couple of years. I'm handing the baton over this year, which I'm quite relieved about. Anyway, these are really great opportunities for the community to come together and talk about the stuff that matters, the stuff that's difficult, the stuff that's awesome, and the stuff where they want help, not with code, but with community. So I went looking in the Django community to see if you had something like this, and I couldn't really find anything directly equivalent, but I did find a lot about Django girls and this program of encouraging women to come into the Django community to learn to code and to become part of things. And as part of that, there's the Django Girls Summit, which brings the organisers together to make those events even better, to share what they know. So these are really good examples of dealing with some of these challenges. Lack of diversity is a problem in the tech world. If you don't agree with me, stand up and look around. And I'm talking about diversity in a very broad sense, not just gender, which is an obvious one, but also age, also colour, also language, also perspective, roles. Who here is a user of a Django website as opposed to a developer? Just using Django. Who are you also developers? Who here is not a developer but just uses a Django website? Can you stand up? You are awesome. You are absolutely awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community. I wish there were a whole lot more of you in this room. And this is something I think both Django and Drupal could learn from WordPress. WordPress events are almost 50-50 developers and users of WordPress. I've heard some really nasty things said by developers about those users though. They're just bloggers. Yeah. Yeah, let's move on. Oh, here's a nice topic. So I think this is something all open source communities struggle with, burnout. We are driven by passion. We are driven by pure kind of blood, sweat and tears in many ways, and it takes a huge amount of energy. And we have people come into our communities brimming with enthusiasm, ready to give to us, ready to help us, ready to make a difference. And we go, great, do all this stuff, do this, do that, be this, do that. And they do it. And then perhaps we don't give them enough acknowledgement. Perhaps they don't get out of that what they thought they would. Perhaps they just get tired. Perhaps they just get sick of dealing with the challenges. And then they step out and step away, and we lose what they brought in some ways. They leave a legacy, sure, but what do we also lose in terms of their knowledge and their perspective? We need to manage this better. This is not one I've got a solution for you. Drupal suffers from this just as much as Django does. Some people say no one can handle 2 core releases of Drupal. It's too brutal. Too brutal. Which brings me to the tragedy of the commons. Who's familiar with this as an economic theory? Yep. Who thinks that we suffer terribly from this factor? Who thinks we actually know we don't? We've beat it? Well, we have, and we do every day. The open source communities around the world, the cities, if you like, are beating the tragedy of the commons just through the fact that they exist and they're successful. The problems that we're dealing with, we deal with. They come up, we work on them. We're problem solvers. And we also have this amazing human superpower. Communication. Because we talk to each other, because we say, hey, we're actually kind of running the grass down too low over here. I think we better ease up and let that field go fallow, right? We actually talk to each other, we adjust, we adapt. So I think that we've beat the tragedy of the commons. And as Django devs, mostly Django devs. Actually, just give me a show of hands, are you a Django dev? Oh, yeah, mostly I think is accurate. As Django devs who've come to a Django event, you are uniquely placed to fight the tragedy of the commons. You're here, you're participating. You're sharing your knowledge. You're learning stuff. You may not be giving a talk, but you're going to go back to your places of work or your projects and bring back what you've learnt. And you will have benefited from the broader knowledge of the community, right? How many of you actually contribute directly to the Django project? Stand up. Thank you. Awesome, awesome work. So, not everyone can do that. Not everyone can participate directly in that way. But many hands make light work. Small contributions help. Bug reports. Who's made a bug report to the Django project? A lot more of you. So you are participants. Give yourselves another round of applause. As developers, we all know the value of a really well-crafted bug report, right? We know that it needs to have details in it, that it should be, we should be able to replicate it and all that kind of stuff. A good bug report is a really useful thing for a community to have. So you're all participating. But there are lots of other ways. I've talked about code and submitting bug reports, but there's also documentation. Who's contributed to the documentation? Some of you, awesome. Who's helped run events? Awesome. Actually, let me pause to say huge thanks to Russell for putting on today. And to the PyCon organisers generally. I have run a few events, so I kind of know what's involved. So that's also contributing. So any of this effort, this energy, right? But I say E3 as another element. Energy. We bring energy. We bring enthusiasm. We bring evangelism. This is emotional labour. This is also contribution. So if you, as devs, who may not be contributing to code, are you evangelists for Django? More coffee? Hallelujah! Are you evangelists for Django? Yes. Okay, so in terms of the things that you might want to, we'll talk about that. Emotional labour is critical, crucial crack for successful open source communities. Without enthusiasm, without energy, passion, evangelism, you are nothing. But we don't value the people who do this work. Think about that. So maybe you don't have time to give. Maybe you don't have energy, enthusiasm, or e to the power of 3 to give. But if you're a professional Django developer, I'm hoping you've got money. Just think about this. Could you afford to donate to the Django Software Foundation the value of 1 hour's work a month? Maybe not, maybe a percentage of that. But if you're earning real cash, doing real work with Django, and you don't have time to do the other stuff, you can make a huge contribution in this very, very simple way. Go to the djangoproject.com/fundraising page, whip out your handy credit card, and pay some goddamn dollars. And if you can't, because you can't afford to, then fine. But maybe you can afford an hour a month to help out in one of those other ways. Yeah? Contribution comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it is the only way we beat the tragedy of the commons. So, speaking of beating things, let's get back to that revolution. What can we do together? We can't share code. We can share ideas. How do we beat back the forces of darkness? What do I mean? Wither the open web. I'm not speaking Elvish. That's a word, wither. Russell and I were discussing it earlier. The open web. This thing that's been around for a long time, that we work in every day, that we probably almost don't think about anymore, like we don't think about oxygen, but we breathe it every minute. The open web. Facebook, Google, Apple, LinkedIn, now owned by Microsoft. They're slowly eating the internet. They're pushing out the independent open web. The thing that we build every day, right, the stuff that we do, is becoming increasingly irrelevant because people are in Facebook. They're sharing stuff in Facebook. Public news is even not, is being kind of gone direct to Facebook, and things like Medium, and people are blogging on LinkedIn. Wither the open web. Of course, these are not the only ones. Apps, like the walled gardens of apps, that we're doing stuff in apps rather than necessarily on the web. There's a lot of factors in play at the moment. One thing though, it is important to note that all of these players are contributing to open source. They really are. Upstream, they're contributing to upstream projects that they use. They're also releasing internal projects. Facebook did Hip Hop VM, which was huge to the PHP community. Lots of learning there that then went into PHP 7. So it's not all bad. They do great work. So I'm not dissing them, but I'm just saying, hey, we need to be aware of what's changing. We need to fight for what we believe is important. The real risk to us as developers of open websites is that our technologies just kind of become irrelevant. And what are we without our technologies? We're still communities, right? We need to level up. We're losing because we suck. We're not putting people first. The big players are investing hugely in user experience, in meeting the needs of their users, in understanding who their users are. How have we become the weakest link? Zach Rosen runs Pantheon, which is a hosting kind of company for mostly WordPress and Drupal. This was part of a conversation between him and Dries Botart, the founder of Drupal, and Matt Mullenweg, the founder of WordPress, and he sort of threw this into the mix. There's a kind of series of blog posts that goes around here, but I think it's important. The people who use our websites, what do they want? I don't want us to call them users. I want us to call them people. They're citizens in our cities. More questions. Keep thinking about the answers. I don't have them. I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts. I stole this slide from a talk Dries gave at South by Southwest earlier this year. Drupal wants to build bridges across technologies. We're not just saying that, we're doing it. Drupal 7, we re-stumped the house. We put the Symfony framework in instead of having all our weird Drupalisms. We brought CK editor in instead of, saying, oh, everybody wants to choose their own WYSIWYG. Actually, no one wants to choose it, they just want it to be there. As a result of our participation in both of those projects have also got stronger. We have participated upstream. They have seen that the problems we're trying to solve are the same problems they're trying to solve. And by working together, we've made all of those projects better. So, can we collaborate with Django? Not on code. Hopefully, I've said there's lots more than code though. The fact that we have events like the Open Source Developers Conference where there is cross-pollination is great. I'd like to see a lot more of that. But Dries says, we can collaborate with different thinkers, different leaders, we can learn from each other, and even where we're different, points of comparison are really useful. And ultimately, I hope that together we can champion the open web. So, I'd like to close by recommending 3 books. Who's heard of Kathy Sierra? Whoa, okay, you all have to go and buy this book immediately. Kathy Sierra is awesome. She's been doing lots of stuff about user experience for years. She was a Java developer and involved in the big Java event some time ago. And she's recently released this book, Badass, Making Users Awesome. No one cares about the tool that they're really using. What they care about is the task. And what Drupal and Django have in common is this broader context, which Kathy talks about. We're making websites, people. We're doing the same thing. Are we solving the problem in fundamentally different ways? Right? There's so much we have in common. Then there's the Art of Community, John O'Bacon, who founded the Community Leadership Summits that run in Portland every year, and he's spun off the Community Leadership Summit X, a bit like TED and TEDx. It's a bit daggy, but anyway. So he's got some really great insights on how we actually understand what our communities do and how we participate in them more effectively. And ultimately, this book. I know some of you have read it, and I'll probably read it too now after this. Yes, but we haven't had a revolution in Australia, right? The closest we got was the Eureka Stockade. There's also the wars we kind of don't talk about, the frontier wars. So, so we say these things, but thankfully the fight for the open web is a different kind of revolution. It's more of a turning of the wheel than a bloody battle, right? So, our strong, healthy, vibrant, diverse communities are a huge, huge strength, right? We might not have as much diversity in the room today as really truly represents the global Django community. I mean, I've seen pictures. You also are global. You also are all over the world and have people of all shapes, sizes, colours and creeds. This is something that's beautiful about open source. We actually put politics and religion and a bunch of other stuff that divides people outside the room. We still have that as part of our individual personalities, but we don't let it stop us from working together. And that's kind of awesome, don't you think? No? Just me? Oh no, you're nodding. Oh yeah, good. So we need to ensure we're creating opportunities for our members, the members of our communities, to experience purpose, autonomy and mastery. I stole those from, I think, Daniel Pink, but they're at the key of motivation. If we can make sure that our communities are offering the opportunity for people to be autonomous, to make decisions, to master their tools, and to have purpose, to contribute to something greater than themselves, then we'll be unbeatable. I think we need to think more about people. The people we're building the web for. Not just us. We need to be thinking about them. All of them. Everywhere. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Donna. We do have time for a few questions, so if anyone would like to ask Donna a question, please remember, of course, that a question should be asked in the form of a question. Starts with how, why, not I or my. Work your way up to the microphone. Just to get the conversation started, though, you mentioned the WordPress is very good at engaging communities, so engaging their non-developer communities. One of the interesting problems, differences there is that there is a world in which you do just use WordPress versus the Django world where in order to use Django, you kind of have to be developing Django, and there isn't that sort of analog of, like, if a site is built in Django, you don't care that it's built in Django, it's just there. So how, and Drupal has essentially the same sort of problem. How do we engage users when there isn't an obvious analog like that?
So really, you all build sites that no one ever uses? Really? Is that a thing? Do we build websites that no one ever visits or sees or participates in?
I don't know. Yes.
Yes, an example.
We need it for the mic because it's been recorded, so yeah.
All right, so I'll fill while you come up and say it, because I think you're going to make a very, very good point. But the point I'm trying to make is that we think of when we're being kind, we call them end users. You know what other profession talks about its customers as users? Sorry.
Am I unsure? Sorry, I think what he was trying to suggest is when you're a user of a WordPress site, you go into the WordPress administration site, you use WordPress, you're very much using it. I think one of the big differences with Django that a lot of people might know. Yeah, I'm clarifying.
No, it was an answer. It's an answer.
The administration part of Django is an optional add-in. Like, you might not know that you're using Django. Like, you'll be an avid user. So in that sense, how do we communicate with a group of people who may not even know they're using the same framework? In the sense that they're coming to different forms, different models, different ideas. They're not using the same thing. How do we engage with that?
Absolutely fair point.
Or should we engage with that?
Or should we? Absolutely fair point, and I was being a little bit cheeky. I know. Look, it's true. Drupal has the same thing. Most of the time, we do not engage with our users at all. They generally do not come to our conferences. Although we have a kind of layer in between called site builders. We're special non-developers with special privileges. And anyway, I won't bore you with my theories on that. So it's a real challenge, actually. How can we? I'd like to know. WordPress does have some unique special privileges in that regard, but I still think that they honour and respect the people who use their sites in ways that Django and Drupal just don't. So, very fair point, totally agree. I'm trying to be a little bit radical and facetious. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk, it was really nice.
Thank you.
So my question is about fundraising, which you covered towards the sort of middle of the end there. As you mentioned, we have a fundraising program in Django.
Wait. Has everyone got, you could probably donate on your phones if you haven't already done so. Very good.
So my question is about, like, how does Drupal tackle that same problem? Like, what kind of programs do you have in place there? Like, is there a cash flow issue there? Is it going well? Like, what's that like?
So I'm on the finance committee of the Drupal Association, and I don't want to talk too much about cash flow at the moment.
Okay.
However, how do we handle fundraising? And this is a really interesting question, so thank you. We have a number of things in place. The core of the cash for the Drupal Association comes from DrupalCon North America. It makes gobloads of money because the American culture is all about sponsorship as a way of contributing. DrupalCon in Europe is a kind of a bit more in the break-even stakes. It's still, profitable, so it's not a complete waste of time. No, sorry. No, it's Joking, please don't take that seriously. So DrupalCon Europe doesn't generate positive cash flow for the organisation. It's an important part of our core mission, so obviously we do it. So there's that. And what we realised some years ago was that wasn't a really sustainable footing to be on. All your eggs in one basket. So we talked about, here's some economic speak, diversifying our revenue and looking at margins. So putting on conferences is really expensive and the actual profit margin you get is quite small. We developed the supporting partner program where we asked people who were donating large gobs of cash to the conference to say, could you donate a smaller amount to us directly, maybe, please? And they did. They understood that supporting the Drupal Association directly, rather than buying coffee for everyone at the event, was actually going to be more directly beneficial. So that was a big first step in our growth. And lots of other kinds of little programs around the side, but that's the big one. And then we also started reaching out to technology partners, so people who, bolt on to Drupal in various ways, who might integrate with Drupal, and some of them started to give us money as well. So that's really powerful. The thing is, we used to have plumbing as part of our motto, but we don't anymore. But we're kind of infrastructure, really, Django and Drupal, right? We're not really shiny, cool, out there tools anymore. We kind of, keep the lights on. So supporting that work is important. And then finally, something we tried for the first time last year was the Drupal 8 Accelerate program. And this is where we actively went out as the board and did fundraising. And I thought it would be hilarious to run a chook raffle. No one else really thought it was hilarious. Thank you, Katie. The Americans were like, what's a chook? What are you talking about, Donna? What are you talking about? I don't get it. So, we raised $250,000.
Wow.
It wasn't a chook raffle. I wish it was. But I did my bit as a chook raffle. Anyone who donated to my part of the campaign, they got a digital chook. And that was awesome. Say it. Digital chicken. Isn't it hilarious? Yeah, okay, it's just me. So anyway, yeah, so there's a lot of stuff you can do. And it's an area where you can think creatively. Often we kind of think about the money side as dirty, but fundamentally, it's one of the key ways we're going to beat the tragedy of the commons. If we can actually raise enough money to perhaps fund full-time work on our projects, we're going to really nail that problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Time?
If there are any other questions, probably just one last one just to round this out. I know I did kind of vaguely invite you on stage to rip Django a new one.
Sorry.
And I know you didn't, and thank you very much for being kind. One thing I would sort of note is Drupal seems to, at least to my perception, seems to have a lot more momentum in some communities. Government work, for example, seems to be one area where it's very, very successful. Do you think there is anything the Django community can learn from the Drupal community about being popular in certain circles or communicating that narrative of why you're good in a certain space or anything like that?
E3. E to the power of 3. That enthusiasm, energy and evangelism is one of the key success factors, KSFs, of Drupal. One of the big kind of turning points in our kind of world was when the White House adopted Drupal. It was back in 2009. But you can see, White House adopts Drupal, and then you look at the trends, it's just like, insane. It started to taper off. But we're still like, we're tapering off and Django's going up and, all that sort of stuff. But we've still got thousands of people at our events. So there's this order of magnitude that's different, right? And the White House choosing was one of them. And I think it's actually started long before that when some key people in the Drupal community decided to use Drupal for change. They got involved in a presidential campaign, a failed presidential campaign of last decade, but they learnt a lot and they developed campaigning techniques. And I think that kind of, sowed the seeds, I guess, for that kind of move into government in particular. Because once the White House did, everyone did. Curiously, our friends over in New Zealand, they were using Drupal for government way before that. Such leaders. Good question.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I say thank you very much on behalf of DjangoCon, and everybody, please, thanks to Donna.